Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are taking a really dramatic shortcut into understanding the accumulated weight of a life in crisis.
They really are.
We're moving beyond just abstract metaphors for stress, and,
Yeah.
and we're wading directly into a highly unique form of, I guess you'd call it forensic psychological accounting.
That's a great way to put it.
We are talking about literal, metaphorical pounds of burden.
That's right. We have been granted access to a stack of source documents that are centered on a really specialized assessment tool, the Marathon Weight Burden Scale, or MWBS for short.
MWBS, okay.
And this tool it's a detailed 100-item checklist. It's designed specifically to estimate the cumulative psychological, situational, and even historical burden an individual is carrying as they try to navigate life.
Their life marathon.
Exactly, what the creators call their life marathon.
Okay, let's unpack this immediately. The whole idea of quantifying psychological weight, it sounds almost, I don't know, fictional. How is this scale actually quantified? And why call it weight instead of just, stress points or something?
Well, the weight metaphor is completely intentional. It's a conceptual synthesis of really every imaginable stressor. The MWBS assigns a value of 10 pounds to every single item checked on the list.
10 pounds per item.
10 pounds per item. And it culminates in a maximum possible burden of 1,000 pounds.
1,000. Wow.
And the true innovation here, I think, is its comprehensive approach. It forces the integration of stressors that, clinicians or maybe HR professionals often analyze separately.
What kind of things?
Things like systemic financial collapse, active violence, a long-term trauma history, identity crises, environmental instability, all of it into a single cumulative figure that must be carried, every single day.
And what's the anchor here? I mean, if 1,000 pounds is the absolute maximum, what's a functional baseline? What's a normal Tuesday for someone?
The documentation provides a really critical baseline that allows for a very powerful interpretation. A typical adult navigating what's categorized as normal life difficulty.
So managing work, bills, the usual stuff.
Exactly. Standard relationships, but without any acute or, systemic crises. That person might endorse approximately 10 of these 100 items.
So 10 items at 10 pounds each. That gives us a functional baseline score of around 100 pounds.
100 pounds, that's it.
So that 100-pound figure is the estimated average life load that an adult is expected to cope with and perform under. It's the weight the system is usually designed to accommodate.
Exactly. And that right there sets the stage for context. Because the person who submitted these source materials, Cody, had their assessment completed, and the results, well, they fundamentally redefine what it means to be overburdened.
The moment of the reveal here it's staggering. Cody checked 91 of the 100 possible items on the scale.
91 out of 100.
Say he won.
Which results in a total MWBS score of 910 pounds.
910 pounds. The sources, they place that score squarely in the interpretation category labeled collapse territory.
Collapse territory.
This isn't just a slight accumulation of stress. It's a near-total simultaneous saturation of critical life domains.
And to really contextualize this for you, the listener, if that average adult life load is about 100 pounds,
right,
Cody's current documented burden is roughly 9.1 times heavier.
9 times.
It's the weight of carrying 9 fully grown people strapped to your back during a marathon. And our mission in this deep dive is to use the incredibly detailed, comprehensive timeline and all the documentation we've been provided to understand exactly how a person accrues 910 pounds of psychological and circumstantial weight.
So let's start by analyzing the score itself. I mean, when someone hits a score like 910 pounds, the immediate and maybe even a judgmental human response might be something like, why didn't they cook better? Why did they let things fall apart?
And the MWBS provides the necessary context to really shut down that line of questioning. The core interpretation of the tool is perhaps its most vital contribution.
Which is what?
Higher scores do not reflect a failure or a weakness on the part of the individual being assessed.
Okay, that's critical.
It is. Instead, they provide, I'd say, irrefutable evidence of heavier, more complex, and more antagonistic conditions and obstacles than the average person ever faces.
I think that's key because it completely repositions the failure. The failure isn't the person, the failure is the environment and the systemic forces that are acting upon that person.
Precisely. The power of the MWPS is that it forces integration. Clinical models, they traditionally separate things. An acute crisis, like a sudden threat of violence, is kept separate from chronic financial stress, like the $500,000 in debt we see here, or mental health symptoms, depression, paralysis,
Mhm.
are separated from environmental stability, like the threat of foreclosure.
So you're saying that MWBS argues you can't look at these things in isolation?
You can't. They are intrinsically linked, and they contribute exponentially to the overall weight.
So the depression symptoms aren't just, say, a chemical imbalance in this context. They are inextricably linked to the fact that the person has over $500,000 in debt, is dealing with predatory institutional actions from their utility company, and is under constant threat of physical violence.
Exactly. The components don't just add up, they multiply. And imagine this.
Yeah.
Imagine having to use 90% of your cognitive energy just managing the physical safety of your environment.
Just to feel safe in your own home.
Right. That leaves you with only 10% to tackle that $500,000 debt. But if you were only carrying 100 pounds, you could dedicate 90% of your energy to the debt. That ratio, right there, illustrates the impossibility of the task.
And this is where the interpretation becomes so critical for any external observer, for employers, friends, legal systems, or even, for self-assessment. The document clearly states that under these conditions, carrying 9.1 times the average load,
Yeah,
expecting the individual to perform or cope or bounce back as if they were carrying only 100 pounds, that would be completely unrealistic and, frankly, potentially harmful. It's like demanding the performance of a marathon runner from someone who is literally carrying 9 other people on their back.
it sets an impossible standard, and it generates this intense internal shame when the individual inevitably fails to meet it. The energy required just for survival, just for safety and basic function at 910 pounds is astronomical. It often leaves zero functional capacity for future planning, work performance, or even emotional regulation.
Okay, let's briefly review the structural architecture of the tool before we dive into the granular evidence from the timeline. The MWBS is divided into 10 domains.
10 domains, each one housing 10 specific items, and each of those domains can contribute a maximum of 100 pounds to the total score.
So what are these pillars?
The 10 pillars of potential stress are load and responsibilities,
Okay.
environment and stability, trauma and psychological injuries, financial strain, housing and safety, social support, immigration stress, health and medical, identity and belonging, and finally, acute crises.
And here's the finding that I think mathematically confirms that collapse territory designation. It's what drives that 910-pound total.
What is it?
8 of the 10 domains were marked as complete saturation.
8 out of 10.
8 out of 10. That means 10 out of 10 items were checked in 8 entirely separate life areas, each one contributing the maximum 100 pounds to the burden. This suggests there was, no functional safe harbor, no stable area left in Cody's life.
That level of saturation indicates that across nearly every single aspect of life, whether it's the history of trauma, the current financial state, the physical environment, or the support network, the ceiling of capacity has been hit, exceeded, and then it's just collapsed.
So now we use the enhanced comprehensive timeline to turn these abstract 100-pound figures into a narrative reality. We need to connect the MWBS categories directly to Cody's documented crises to prove how that 10 out of 10 saturation was achieved in 8 domains all at the same time.
Let's start with the first one.
Let's. The first pillar is load and responsibilities, 100 pounds.
This domain looks at the feeling that your duties and your expectations they exceed your capacity. It's that perpetual sense of being overwhelmed by the sheer volume of tasks and obligations. And Cody endorsed every single item here.
And the timeline, it provides a really stark picture of professional and personal obligations that just became crushing. Starting around 2023, we see the dramatic scale of that initial professional failure, which it really set the tone for everything else.
That's the absolute core of the professional load, the complete collapse of a high-stakes venture. We learned the revenue of the primary business venture dropped from nearly $2 million annually
2 million?
down to less than $100,000 in just 18 months.
That's not a downturn, that's a free fall.
It's a total collapse. And managing the dissolution of a multi-million-dollar entity, dealing with creditors, winding down accounts, facing multiple legal judgments, all while you're shouldering $500,000 in personal and business debt. That constitutes an impossible professional load for a single person.
And this professional collapse, it didn't just cause fatigue. The sources are clear on this. It caused a cognitive shutdown.
Yes, they document constant burnout and exhaustion, which led to Cody being mentally paralyzed and unable to function normally.
Mentally paralyzed.
They were physically present, but functionally just shut down, unable to meet even the remaining obligations.
But here's where the load becomes, like you said before, exponential. It wasn't just managing the wreckage of their own business.
No, it was this complex, non-reciprocal emotional labor that was layered right on top. Cody was managing the remnants of the failed businesses completely single-handedly,
So single.
while simultaneously supporting the incredibly complex and highly sensitive asylum case of Zaitullah, who is a traumatized Afghan veteran.
That alone is a full-time job.
A full-time emotional and administrative job.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, there was the added stress of managing a new urgent health crisis for their ill mother, who was in the burn unit in 2024.
So that's 3 separate life-or-death full-time crises layered onto the existing foundation of professional and financial ruin.
It's just an unsustainable weight. It logically confirms 100 pounds in the responsibilities domain without any question. This is the weight of being the sole functioning central nervous system for multiple collapsing entities and multiple vulnerable people.
Okay, let's move to the next pillar, environment and stability. Another 100 pounds.
This domain assesses chaotic, unpredictable surroundings and, crucially, systemic interference. And the timeline here, it moves beyond just bad luck. It documents active, targeted antagonism that was aimed at preventing any kind of recovery.
And that targeted antagonism centers heavily on this individual, Lewis, and his campaign. The sources detail systemic barriers that were actively interfering with Cody's ability to rebuild.
Yes, Lewis's professional sabotage campaign. It involved contacting other companies to block Cody from getting work, and he successfully scared off potential clients.
And you have to remember, when you are carrying 910 pounds, every single potential income stream is vital. It's a lifeline.
To have an antagonistic individual deliberately block and dismantle your professional rebuilding efforts, well, that's an act of economic violence. It really is.
You know, what was the result?
The result. Cody was forced to shut down all social media, all business pages, just to protect what was left of their reputation and their remaining clients from any further harm and liability. That is chaos entering the professional environment and destroying any external stability they might have had.
And the chaos wasn't limited to work. The home environment itself became actively chaotic and physically dangerous. We see repeated threats and acts of violence from Luis that required police intervention and eventually the need for the protection of an ex parte order for protection in November of 2024.
We should probably pause here and explain that term, ex parte.
Good idea.
It means from one side only. So this type of order is issued very quickly in emergency situations based only on the testimony of the petitioner, in this case Cody, because the danger is deemed immediate and severe enough to warrant protection before the respondent, Luis, can be formally served or appear in court.
So the fact that the court immediately recognized the severity of the threat confirms the instability of the environment.
Absolutely. It's a legal validation of the chaos.
And then finally, there's the chronic underlying instability, the very foundation beneath their feet, which is detailed by the constant threat of utility disconnection and the ongoing foreclosure risk on the primary residence, which has been active since 22.
It's impossible. You cannot build stability or plan a way forward when the core elements of your life, shelter, safety, power, are constantly under threat of removal. 100 pounds, easily.
Which brings us to the third 100-pound pillar, trauma and psychological injuries.
This domain measures the history and the cumulative impact of psychological injuries, and that pervasive feeling of constant fear. The timeline shows this burden started very early and was then just relentlessly compounded.
The history of significant trauma is documented in a prior toxic relationship with someone named Ron Castellanos, which established a baseline of enduring psychological injury.
The sources are pretty explicit about this. It involved deliberate tactics like sleep deprivation, constant conflict, thrown objects, and even documented cuts and bruises.
So there's a pre-existing condition, in a way.
Pre-existing psychological injury, exactly. And trauma is an injury that never fully heals, it just scars over. The subsequent crises, well, they ripped open all those old wounds. By 2024 and 2025, the hypervigilance and the fear responses are documented in Cody's own words.
What did they say?
They reflect a state of constant terror. I panic at every sound. I'm terrified to answer the phone, check emails, or open the door.
That is a 10 out of 10 saturation on the constant vigilance metric.
Oh.
The world outside the home is perceived as a perpetual threat.
And the internal mechanism for coping with this level of sustained crisis, it just shut down entirely. We see the psychological injuries manifesting as complete emotional numbness,
Cognitive shutdown.
experiencing cognitive shutdown, severe depression, and these long periods of being mentally paralyzed. The mind simply went offline to conserve energy for survival.
We also have to acknowledge the sheer weight of compounded grief that hit during the absolute peak of the 2023 business collapse. The trauma wasn't just isolated to financial ruin.
No, it wasn't. The document lists the traumatic death of a beloved dog, the rehoming of two cats, which is a loss in itself, and the deaths of two aunts and one cousin, all within the same narrow window as the professional and financial ruin.
And grief, especially when it's compounded by trauma and exhaustion, is an immense psychological load. It ensures 100 pounds in this domain.
You lose the emotional capacity to even mourn when you are struggling just to survive from one hour to the next.
Right. So let's talk about the financial domain, financial strain. This is where that abstract 910-pound score feels the most concrete. We're looking at sustained financial ruin, not just temporary difficulty.
The raw numbers here, they confirm the saturation. The ongoing debt pressure is just staggering. Total accumulated debt exceeding $500,000.
Off $1 million.
And this includes multiple legal judgments that total approximately $69,881 from major creditors. Chase, Citi, Amex, Capital One.
So managing the daily reality of collection calls, legal letters, the constant fear of your wage or your bank account being garnished, that's a 247 psychological burden.
It is. But this debt wasn't accrued through, lavish spending. Much of it resulted from exploitation and betrayal.
That's a really important point.
The timeline documents over $100,000 in uncompensated labor work performed that was never paid for, and over $50,000 in unpaid invoices due to the ICE tax betrayal we'll talk more about, plus an additional $11,000 lost to check fraud.
So you're actively digging yourself deeper into debt while working full-time. It's like running on a treadmill that's going backwards.
That is the core injustice here. The person who performed the work, who built the value, was systematically denied the compensation, yet they were left with all the debt. This financial domain reflects not just poverty, but active victimization.
And the lack of any financial margin for error, any safety net, is so vividly demonstrated by a single $20 fee.
It's incredible.
We see this critical financial reversal in July 2025, where an ACH payment to the utility company failed. Now, in the context of a $500,000 crisis, a $20 return payment fee. It shouldn't be life-altering.
You shouldn't even register.
But in this scenario, it initiated a $1,590 swing against the account balance, which is what led to the utility disconnection.
That demonstrates a total and complete collapse of the financial safety net. A $20 fee was enough to trigger a major housing crisis. That's 100 pounds of financial strain, no question.
And that leads us right into the next pillar, housing and safety, another saturated domain at 100 pounds.
This domain focuses on the security and the physical safety of the living situation. And the timeline documents how the home, which should be a sanctuary, a safe place,
It became a site of active danger.
a site of active danger and physical threat. It's a devastating reflection of constant danger.
So the physical threat is persistent, and it's stemming from Luis's violence. We're talking about being struck in the face, throwing objects, and that terrifying attempted home invasion with threats to scale the exterior window.
And the impact of this is profound psychological imprisonment. Cody described feeling like a prisoner in my own home.
A prisoner in their own home.
They were trapped by the violence outside and the inability to leave because of the financial constraints, and also the need to protect their service animal, Shiji. This covers the psychological insecurity aspect of the domain entirely.
And the evidence of physical damage, it confirms the frequency and the severity of the threat. It's not just threats, it's action.
Oh, absolutely. A door kicked in and broken in 2024, a heavy metal item hurled at the window in November of that same year, and then multiple locks and even a heavy-duty 1,300-pound security latch damaged by forcible entry in September 2025.
So this shows a sustained effort by Luis to breach Cody's physical security. He's actively trying to get in.
A sustained and violent effort. And finally, the housing insecurity itself. Beyond the foreclosure risk, the utility disconnection forcing displacement, forcing hotel stays from July through September of 2025. It ensured that stability was completely unattainable.
When you cannot rely on the locks on your door or the heat in your pipes, 100 pounds in the housing and safety domain is unavoidable.
It really is.
Okay, next up is social support. And this is often the only thing that can mitigate a burden like this. But here, we see that domain also completely collapsed. It's providing zero mitigation and instead contributing to the overall weight through betrayal and loss.
It is a textbook case of cascading relational failure and isolation. The betrayal, it began professionally, but it caused immediate and severe social damage.
With the business partners, Crystal Varela and Arlette Gonzalez.
Exactly. They engaged in exploitation, a hostile takeover, and then a vicious smear campaign. They destroyed Cody's reputation and professional network.
And the sources detail that the relationships that were intended to be intimate and supportive were, in fact, toxic and draining.
The relationship with Lewis, for example, was defined not by partnership, but by violence, sabotage, and what the source material describes as the trauma-bonded caretaker-performer dyad.
Can you explain that?
It means Cody was constantly trying to caretake and mitigate Lewis's volatility, performing a role to keep the peace, which just drains all available emotional resources. It's not a partnership. It's a survival strategy.
Then came the crucial abandonment during the most critical crisis period.
After his deportation in 2023, husband Joel essentially abandoned me, failing to provide any support during the subsequent financial and personal crisis in 2024.
And that loss of spousal support, when the situation was at its most dire, it eliminated a necessary internal structural pillar.
It did. And then the crushing loss that really cemented the isolation. A close friend who had been helping with basic needs was tragically killed near the residence in 2024.
So that wasn't just an emotional loss?
No, it was the elimination of one of the last remaining pillars of practical, tangible support. The saturation here is total. Betrayal, toxicity, abandonment, and death. It leaves complete isolation. 100 pounds.
And that brings us to the next pillar, which is more internal. Identity, belonging, and distance, also at 100 pounds.
This domain captures that internal burden. The loss of self-concept, a sense of belonging, and the feeling of being profoundly distant from stability or any kind of meaningful future.
The timeline shows a profound, forced shift in external roles. Cody experienced the complete loss of these externally defined identities.
A successful business owner?
The husband, the provider, all of those roles.
The business collapse and Joel's deportation essentially dissolved those established roles, leaving a functional vacuum where identity used to be.
And that loss of role is coupled with the overwhelming feeling of being utterly stuck.
Right. Unable to move forward or rebuild because of the persistent financial and mental health paralysis. They were psychologically suspended in a state of crisis, unable to connect with the version of themselves who could solve these problems.
And we have to address the concurrent realization and acknowledgement of a transgender female identity. The critique we saw pointed out that simply listing this as a stressor is reductive, and I agree.
It is. We need nuance here. This is a profound, necessary step toward authenticity and self-realization.
Absolutely.
However, performing this transition, navigating external systems, social acceptance, medical needs, it requires immense cognitive and emotional energy.
And when a person is already carrying 910 pounds, every unit of energy required for this essential but difficult transformation adds stress and uncertainty to an already overwhelmed state.
It's the cost of cognitive switching. You are trying to rebuild your core identity while simultaneously navigating daily physical threats and $500,000 in debt. The necessary focus and mental bandwidth required for the transition become another item on the 910-pound manifest.
So it ensures 10 out of 10 saturation in this domain because both the crisis and the critical identity work are demanding all available resources.
Exactly.
Okay, our final 100-pound pillar, acute crises.
This one relates to recent destabilizing crises, and the sources prove that the years 2023, 2024, and 2025 were a continuous, concentrated storm, not just a series of mild disruptions.
The acute phase began with that sudden financial shock in 2023, the business revenue collapse, and the immediate entry of multiple legal judgments. This was a sudden, catastrophic loss of status and security.
And it was instantly followed by the recent major loss of Joel's deportation, also in 2023. Cody explicitly stated, this event broke your last internal structure.
Deportation is an acute external force that completely eliminates a foundational element of their life. It demands immediate and incredibly difficult adjustments.
Then the immediate and recurring threat of danger escalated dramatically. The attempted home invasion and the homicide threats from Luis in November 2024. This constitutes a clear, recent, life-threatening crisis that just shattered any remaining sense of safety.
And finally, the ultimate acute crisis affecting basic human status. Utility disconnection for multiple nights during freezing temperatures in 2025.
When the lights, the heat, and the power are gone, despite pending medical documentation, that is a complete and immediate destabilization of everything else. The concentration of simultaneous, high-impact events ensures a 10 out of 10 saturation of acute crises.
Okay, so we have now thoroughly established the 800 pounds of saturation across those 8 main pillars.
Right. And now we pivot to the two domains that weren't fully saturated, but still contributed significantly to the total weight: health and immigration stress.
Let's start with health and medical. It's a score of 90 pounds, which means 9 out of 10 items were checked. This indicates a near total collapse of physical and medical function, and it seems to be driven by all those external stressors we just covered.
The documentation points clearly to compounding health failures that are a direct result of the sustained crisis. We see chronic conditions being exacerbated: a suspected mini-stroke, extreme anxiety, debilitating fatigue, and a severe intensification of ADHD symptoms in 2023.
The body was literally breaking down under the 910-pound load.
It was. And here is the profound systemic failure that links right back to that financial domain. The loss of health insurance following the business collapse forced Cody off their necessary medication.
And that's a critical amplification loop. The financial crisis causes a health decline, which then removes access to the very treatment that could mitigate that decline.
It's a perfect example of why the MWBS integrates domains. You cannot treat the ADHD symptoms effectively when the financial domain has eliminated the pharmaceutical safety net.
The physical manifestation of sustained stress is also documented through severe migraines and dizziness, particularly during conflicts with Luis in 2024.
The body was just physically reacting to this state of terror. The missing 10 pounds here is statistically irrelevant. 90 pounds confirms a severe, unmanaged health crisis.
Now let's look at the other non-saturated domain, immigration stress. The score here is only 20 pounds, 2 out of 10 items checked, which on the surface looks low.
It does. But we have to immediately contextualize this low score. It's a reflection of Cody's role as the advocate, not the principal person in the immigration case. The real weight is in the caregiver burden.
That's the crucial context. Cody is the advocate for 2 major, highly complex immigration cases: Joel's deportation case and Zaytula's asylum application. So while Cody is not personally facing deportation, they are absorbing the full burden of managing the legal and emotional fallout for 2 very vulnerable people.
And the sources highlight the immense mental toll of constantly managing Zaytula's existential fear. He is a traumatized Afghan veteran fleeing the Taliban.
Right.
So Cody is constantly absorbing that fear, hearing about Zaytula's family being questioned by the Taliban, learning he was called a servant of the Kashmirs. This is constant secondhand exposure to life or death threats.
And then there is the massive administrative weight. We noted the specific terms in the critique: the management of SIV process delays.
SIV stands for Special Immigrant Visa. It's a highly complex, bureaucratic, and often painfully slow process for individuals who assisted the U.S. military. Cody became the sole primary support for Zaytula,
So what did that involve?
handling all the documentation, coordinating legal support, fighting these bureaucratic SIV process delays, and even teaching him English, all while dealing with their own 910-pound personal collapse.
So that 20-pound score is disproportionately impactful because it represents cognitive switching under extreme duress.
It does. Imagine trying to read and translate dense legal documents about international asylum protocol while simultaneously worrying about your home being foreclosed upon and whether the electricity will stay on for the night. That complexity drains resources, even if the score is numerically low.
Okay, so as we move into the final review of the timeline, we have to adhere to the key pattern that was identified in the sources.
Which is that every single crisis created vulnerability to the next.
Exactly. And institutions and predatory individuals seized on these vulnerabilities, forming an interconnected cascade that actively amplified the original weight. It's hard enough to navigate a severe crisis, but now we have to examine the systems and partners that were supposed to offer protection, but instead amplified the crisis.
Let's start with the business betrayal. The ICE attacks joint venture breakdown. That was the catastrophic financial trigger.
The sources provide almost forensic detail on the injustice of that partnership.
They do. The structure was clearly unfair and defined by exploitation by the partners, Crystal Varela and Arlif Gonzalez. Cody contributed, $8,493.66 in capital and 683 documented hours of high-level labor.
And the partner, Arlif.
Arlif contributed a mere $1,577 and then actively stole $800 from the venture.
So this exploitation, it quickly turned into outright warfare.
A hostile takeover. being locked out of the very systems they built, and then an aggressive smear campaign using defamatory attacks on their professional reputation.
Mm.
This didn't just cause a financial loss, it poisoned the well for any future rebuilding efforts.
The quoted result from the documentation, I think it encapsulates the systemic injustice perfectly.
What did it say?
The only person who actually built anything of value, financially exploited, gaslit, and scapegoated, left with the debt, the blame, and no way forward.
That is not an individual failing at business. That is an individual being financially victimized and scapegoated into ruin.
And as we already established, this betrayal had immediate ripple effects. The business collapse meant the loss of health insurance, which forced Cody off necessary medication, directly compounding the weight in the health domain. The cascade was instantaneous.
And that cascade leads us to the utility company. This section of the timeline reveals the chilling details of how a major institution, ES Indiana, allegedly compounded the financial and housing crisis through its own administrative mechanisms, despite being provided with documentation of hardship.
We have to focus on the predatory mechanism that was used in 2025, the one that effectively inflated the debt beyond actual consumption.
Right. In April, AES Indiana offered a payment extension. This lowered the immediate balance and provided a false sense of relief to someone who was drowning in debt.
But that false relief was, in essence, a financial trap.
It was, because in May 2025, that extension was canceled without notice or explanation. This immediately inflated the total outstanding balance by approximately $5,225. This single, unexplained systemic action drove the debt far beyond actual electricity usage and made the balance completely unmanageable.
And the punitive fee loop tightened in July. Despite a payment attempt, it was reversed, triggering an additional $20 fee. This simple failure created a total negative swing of approximately $1,590 against the account in that one incident.
And that's due to late fees, reversal penalties, reactivation costs.
The IURC complaint documentation is highly instructive here.
We should explain what that is. The IURC is the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission. They're the body that oversees utility rates and service.
And Cody filed a detailed complaint documenting that the utility debt was inflated by approximately $3,000 to $3,300 in fees and systemic actions,
Like the fee loop and the extension cancellation.
versus only about $4,700 in actual usage costs for that year-to-date period.
So that means nearly 40% of the total debt that triggered the disconnection was predatory fees and systemic manipulation, not just usage.
And the ultimate consequence was devastating. Utility disconnection, despite a pending ADA accommodation request and medical hardship documentation, this forced a painful displacement and an inability to work from home, which again eliminated the sole potential income stream. The system actively pushed the person further into collapse.
And finally, we examine the highly localized, individual predatory failure, the actions of Luis that systematically targeted Cody's physical safety and social network.
The timeline details a rapid escalation of violence through 2024 and 2025. It moved from sudden screaming and throwing objects, sometimes specifically at Cody while they were asleep, to severe criminal allegations.
The source material details an alleged sexual assault in September 2025 while Cody was unconscious, and multiple acts of forcible entry and property damage.
So the necessary legal action was the filing of the protection order on November 18, 2024, which protected Cody, Zaitula, and Joel.
We have to highlight a complex legal detail mentioned in the source. This order included a Brady disqualified status regarding Luis's ability to possess firearms.
For our listener, the Brady Act is a U.S. federal law related to gun control. If a person is under a qualifying protection order, meaning a court has found them to be an imminent physical threat to an intimate partner, they are federally prohibited from possessing firearms.
So the inclusion of the Brady disqualified status in the order highlights the court's official recognition of the extreme and ongoing danger Luis posed to Cody and those in the home.
Yet, the protection order was immediately violated.
The severity of the September 2025 violation, where Luis forcibly broke down the bedroom door and damaged multiple locks and the heavy-duty security latch, allegedly while carrying a weapon. It demonstrates a total disregard for the legal system and continuation of the physical threat.
And Luis's actions compounded the isolation on every front. His professional sabotage blocked access to business work, and his violence compounded the losses of the support network. When systems are designed to offer fundamental protection, and that protection fails so violently, the weight of life increases exponentially. The risk becomes localized and unavoidable.
We have meticulously documented 91 different checked items. We've explored the crises across 10 life domains. It is, conceptually, an almost unimaginable load to carry into any given day.
So revisiting the MWBS interpretation is really the only way to conclude this assessment. That 910-pound score is not a metric of failure.
No, it is irrefutable, quantified evidence that the individual's external circumstances were overwhelmingly complex, hostile, and antagonistic. This profile documents a sustained environment of systemic failure, betrayal, and violence that would crush nearly anyone.
But the narrative can't just end at the quantification of the burden. To be carrying 910 pounds, 9.1 times the average weight, and still be generating documentation, seeking legal action, and caring for others, that's an extraordinary testament to human persistence.
The documented acts of resilience are profound, especially given the state of cognitive paralysis. The single most remarkable act is the meticulous, almost forensic level of documentation itself.
Cody created the Enhanced Comprehensive Timeline and the 22-statement AES-ADA packet.
And that packet came complete with 22 compiled billing statements and detailed audit reports. This organized data required immense cognitive energy while they were physically and mentally shutting down.
And we see the practical, proactive measures taken despite the duress, actively seeking legal protection through protection orders, establishing energy efficiency measures.
Right. Removing non-essential appliances, lowering the water heater,
And creating that highly detailed 36-month seasonal payment plan for the utilities to try and manage the insurmountable debt. These are acts of resistance against the collapse.
And through it all, the continued caretaking burden remains. Cody maintains sole support for Zaitullah, the traumatized Afghan veteran, helping him with his asylum case and caring for their service animal, Gigi, amidst the freezing temperatures and displacement.
That dedication to supporting external life, while their own internal structure was crumbling, is the ultimate definition of resilience under duress.
The source material offers a powerful visual metaphor to synthesize the interconnected, exponential nature of these crises.
The document refers to the crises as cables enredados en un edificio en llamas.
Tangled cables in a burning building.
Tangled cables in a burning building.
And that metaphor illustrates perfectly why the load is exponential, not merely additive. The business collapse is the spark that ignites the financial fire. That fire instantly melts the cable connecting them to health insurance, which shorts the ability to work, which exposes the person to the predatory institutional actions of the utility company and the constant threat of their abusive partner. The 910 pounds reflects a complex living structure on fire, where every failing system is intertwined and feeding the destruction.
So that brings us to our final thought.
If the marathon weight burden scale score of 910 pounds is a conceptual tool for accurately contextualizing human performance, survival, and failure, what does this extreme data point reveal about the ethical duty of institutions?
From utility companies and legal systems to business partners and even romantic partners.
When dealing with an individual already carrying 9.1 times the average life load, what is that duty?
The sources show an individual attempting to run a race while carrying an insurmountable weight.
Did these systems simply witness the inevitable collapse? Or did the systems fail the person who needed support, accommodation, and basic protection the most? That is the question you must carry with you as you navigate the complexities of your own environment.